March 31st, 1922, Bavaria, Germany. 6 people, an entire family, and their maid are brutally slaughtered with a mattock on the remote farm. But this isn't just a murder. It's a century-old mystery wrapped in silence, and a crime scene so strange it sparked decades of speculation. There was one family, one weapon, and it's one of Germany's darkest mysteries. This is the Hinterkaifeck murders, footsteps in the attic. Hey, y'all, I'm Chris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Potterworth. Welcome to Hitch to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yes, welcome. And for our friends in Istanbul.
Istanbul.
Yes, Hoşgeldin.
Do you look up how to say all of those?
Listen, I look them up. I listen to recordings.
I'm only asking because we're in Germany today.
Yeah.
And even though I took German in high school, some of these names are a little hard.
Yeah.
So everybody needs to bear with me today.
Hey, they can't be any worse than my interpretations of the welcome. I do the best I can.
You do a great job. Wherever you're listening, be sure to subscribe to Hitch to Homicide, then like, rate, and review the podcast so other people who are just like you, love true crime, can find us. And if you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button below.
Yep.
Please. Give us a comment. Give us a like. It moves us up in the algorithm.
Yep.
If you want true crime with us all the time, please go join our closed Facebook group, The In-Laws and Outlaws. Go to Facebook and type in H2H In-Laws and Outlaws. Answer a couple questions. You're in. Go join. Mm-hmm. I post photos and other information in there as well. It's a really great group of people.
It is.
I've actually have pictures of these people in Germany. So you're going to want to see it.
Okay. All right.
You can find us on Instagram at Hitch to Homicide or on X at H2H_podcast. And we have a Buy Me a Coffee link if you want to send Rob some coffee. He drinks it all the time.
I have it surgically attached. My cup is surgically attached to my hand.
You can find that link in our show notes. You can also send us a text. The link to that is at the top of the show notes where it says, send Chris and Rob a text.
Yes.
Well, call me Butter because I'm on a roll.
Yeah, she'll be here all week.
I'm going to wheel through some older cases that have been on the list and requested more than once. And today we're going to Germany. Wir haben nach Deutschland.
We're not going to Istanbul.
No.
Okay.
I've been brushing up on my German language skills.
Good.
I say that, and now I'm going to fail miserably. I just set myself up. Before we get started, let me thank some sources. Wikipedia, True Crime Database, Reddit, Mental Floss, Darlene P. Campos blog, Dark Histories podcast, The Art blog, Makers and Quinn, DefrostingColdCases.com, Hinterkaifeck.net, and IceColdCases.com. Can you tell how cold the case is?
It's very cold. All right. Well, you ready?
Ich bin. I am.
Okay. Here we go. Let's do it.
The Hinterkaifeck farmstead was a solitary place. It's located near the woods outside the Bavarian town of Gruber, about an hour's drive from München or Munich and a half-mile behind or hinter the town of Kaifeck.
Okay.
Hinterkaifeck. It was built around 1863 and had been owned by the Gruber family. Located approximately 43 miles north of Munich in Germany, it was situated in the state of Bavaria, the founding region of the future Nazi Party, which grew significantly in the years between 1921 and 1922, owing to the backlash against the socialist and liberal politicians in the region as Germany's economic problems escalated as a result of the weakness of the Weimar Republic.
Okay.
That's your history lesson.
There you go. And moving on.
And this farmstead is 4 parts: the living quarters or the house, the barn, which is attached directly to the living quarters with no separation by door or locks or a wall. It's used for livestock. And they store hay there and tools. Then there's the machinery room, which is small, attached. It's a small attached workshop and a storage space near the barn. And the stable for the animals, cows, pigs, and chickens.
Okay.
In 1922, it was the home of 35-year-old Victoria Gabrielle and her 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Josef, as well as her elderly parents. The patriarch of the Gruber family, 63-year-old Andreas, and his wife Cecilia, aged 72.
Okay.
Their daughter Victoria was a widow and had moved home to live with her parents, bringing with her her 2 small children from her marriage. And together, the family lived with their maid. Now, the family was known for keeping to themselves, and people thought that Andreas was aggressive and treated his wife and children horribly. Brutal treatment he showed to his wife, children, and neighbors. If Andreas didn't like something or what somebody did, he was known to attack people with dangerous objects.
Jeez.
Like a shotgun or a scythe or a pitchfork.
That's pretty dangerous.
He would lock his children in a cold cellar for many days during winter, and one of his daughters, Sophie, died as a result of the abuse. But that's not the only abuse going on in the house. Victoria was supposed to be a World War I widow, but her husband, Carl's body was never recovered. And after Carl went missing and was presumed dead and she moved home, her father, Andreas, began raping her. Something that was widely known. But Victoria has a thing for a local man who lives nearby. His name is Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Okay. And these two carried on a love affair as well during the sexual abuse by her father. And Victoria gets pregnant. It's thought that Lorenz is the one who went to the authorities to say, look he's raping his daughter.
Right.
And Andreas is charged with the crime of incest. Actually, they're both charged. But Andreas ended up spending an entire year in jail for the offense.
Oh, wow.
Victoria gave birth to little Josef out of wedlock, and it was thought that he was a product of the incestuous relationship between her father and her. Or the baby was Lorenz. In fact, he and Victoria were pretty vocal that the baby belonged to the two of them. And Lorenz wanted to marry Victoria, but Andreas said no. And eventually, Lorenz married another woman. So I guess even if your dad is a sexual predator, he has a say-so in who you marry, even though you've been married before and you're a widow with 2 kids.
Wow.
In the weeks and months leading up to the end of March 1922, several strange occurrences happened in and around Hinterkaifeck. 6 months earlier, Krisis Rieger, the family maid, just up and quit because she kept hearing strange noises coming from the attic, and she thought the farmhouse was haunted. Like, I'm out.
Yeah.
March 1922, Andreas stumbles upon a strange newspaper from Munich on his property. He didn't remember buying it, and at the time thought that maybe the postman had lost the newspaper on his route. But no one in the area around them subscribed to this newspaper, which only made it a little more perplexing. Then there was the key to the farmhouse. It mysteriously vanished during the last week of March, and even more hinky, Andreas told his neighbors that he'd discovered tracks in the fresh snow, tracks that led from the forest to a broken lock on the door in the farm's engine room, but not back out again. Later that night, the family heard footsteps in the attic, but when Andreas went to check it out, he found nothing. He was pretty open about telling several other people and neighbors all about it. He told them about the missing key, the footprints, the sounds, but he refused any help and didn't inform the police what was happening. Something else that was hinky, on Thursday, March 31st, little Cecilia told one of her girlfriends at school that her mom, Victoria, had run away from the farm the night before after a violent fight with her grandparents and was found hours later in the forest that surrounded the farm. Which just tells me this little girl is going to school and saying, hey, my granddad was trying to rape my mom and she was running away.
Yeah.
The next day, on the afternoon of Friday, March 31st, 1922, the new maid arrived at the Hinterkaifeck farm. Her name was Maria Baumgartner.
Okay.
Maria's sister brought her to the farm, and left after a short little visit. Maria's sister was the last person to see the Gruber family and her sister alive. At some point after Maria's sister leaves, a killer strikes. One by one, they seem to have been taken from the house to the barn. First was the elderly Cecilia Gruber. The killer hits her 8 times in the right side of her head with what they now call a howick. We call it a mattock.
Okay.
The killer crushes her skull with these 8 hits. Her daughter Victoria is next. The killer strangled her and then hit her in the head 9 times with the mattock, also on the right side of her head, crushing her skull. Then young Cecilia is taken to the barn. The killer put an iron band in her mouth to keep her quiet, and because of this, her jaw was smashed. I don't know if he sexually molested her, but he took off most of her clothes. She is struck on the right side of her face with the mattock, but before she died, while she was in pain or being raped, she pulled out her own hair in clumps. When he's through with her, he tosses the iron band into the hayloft, or perhaps he hid it there. It'll be found later. But the blow to her head wasn't what killed little Cecilia. Her throat had been slit by a pocket knife. When he's finished inside the barn, he hides the bodies, piling them on top of each other, partially covering them all with hay and a wooden door.
Oh, wow.
Inside the house are Maria, the new maid who is spending her first night in the house, and little Joseph. He's asleep in his bassinet. The killer hits Maria on top of the head, leaving a hole in her head. She was also bludgeoned on the right side of her head. He leaves her to die in the floor with her head almost under the bed. And little Joseph had been slaughtered inside his bassinet and died from a single powerful blow to the right side of his skull.
Wow.
The mattock and the pocket knife both belonged to Andreas. His demise was different than the rest of the family. He died from falling onto the tip of the same mattock, tearing open his carotid artery in his neck, causing him to bleed out pretty fast. The skin was torn open on the right side of his cheek, and his cheekbone was protruding. This was his one injury.
Okay.
The day after the murders, on April 1st, 2 men arrived at the Hinterkaifeck farm, Hans and Eduard Shirofsky. I'm trying hard, guys.
Say that 10 times fast.
They knocked on the door. They were there to take a coffee order, but nobody answered. So they knocked on the windows, and still nobody answered. Then they walked around the yard of the farm, and there was nobody there. What they do notice is that the gate to the machine house, or the barn where they kept the tractors and equipment, was open. But they didn't suspect anything, and they left. Then when 7-year-old Cecilia didn't show up for school for a few days with no explanation, and people around them were noticing that the family wasn't at church on Sunday, God forbid, they began to worry.
Okay.
On the morning of April 4th, I did think it was funny. They went to church every single Sunday, and he's raping his daughter.
Yeah.
And everybody knows.
Yeah.
On the morning of February 4th, local mechanic Albert Hoffner went to Hinterkaifeck to repair an engine on one of their tractors. And he doesn't see anyone, no family. All he hears are the farm animals and the family dog howling from inside the barn. And he waits for an hour on Andreas, or anybody for that matter, to show up.
Sure.
Then he decided to go ahead and start working and repair the engine. And he was done in about 4.5 hours, but he didn't see anyone. Later that day, around 3:30 p.m., Lorenz Schlittenbauer sent his 16-year-old son, Johann, and his 9-year-old stepson, Josef, to the Hinterkaifeck farm to see if the Grubers had made it home. But the boys made it home and said, nope, we didn't see anybody. There's nobody there.
Right.
So their dad, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, headed to the farm later that day, and he took with him Michaela Pohl and Jakob Zelig. And these 3 go into the barn, entering through the open door to the former engine house, leaving the boys outside. So the young boys came back too.
Okay.
The next door to the barn was locked and was forced open. That's when they see the bodies. Andreas, his wife, Cecilia, their daughter, Victoria Gabrielle, and his granddaughter, Cecilia, all in the barn. Lorenz then went into the house alone shortly afterward and found the maid, Maria Baumgartner, and the youngest little kid, Josef, murdered inside the house.
Right.
After the bodies are discovered, Pohl and Ziegel leave the crime scene with Josef, and Lorenz waits in the house for the police to arrive. And Mayor Grieger of Wagen is notified and contacts the police. Another Gruber resident is sent to the Waldhofen to call the Schobenhausen police. Onlookers visit the crime scene, and they're rubbernecking like crazy. So they live in this small area. You know, this guy's probably out there going, I was just there fixing the tractor, and I was just there knocking on the door for coffee. And so they're looking at everything. They're walking through everything. They're rubbernecking like crazy.
Right.
6 p.m., the police from Hoevart and neighbor Grieger from Vangren arrive. 6:15, a telephone message reaches the Munich criminal police. The police from Schrobenhausen arrive in Hinterkaifeck. They rope off the crime scene, little too late. Yeah. The rubberneckers are moved away and can no longer enter and view the murder site at will. By 9:30 p.m., the Kripo's journey, that's the criminal division of the police from Munich to Hinterkaifeck, begins. The 6 officers, including 2 dog handlers, arrive in Gruber.
All right.
They're going through a lot of people here, and they're just dead bodies laying around. At 10 p.m., the court commission from Schrobenhausen arrives but does not stay until the arrival of the Criminal Investigation Department from Munich, and the case was given to Inspector Georg Reingruber and his department, who had the task of investigating the gruesome killings. And their investigation was kind of hindered because what they discovered is that someone, probably the killer, had entered the house and interacted with the crime scene, moving bodies and other items belonging to the family around and even cooking meals in the kitchen.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
So he killed them and stayed.
He worked up an appetite.
Apparently.
Jeez.
And here's their theory. They believe the crime scene has been altered because on a wall in the house, a calendar showed the date for April 1st, 1922, and it was determined the victims were all murdered the previous day. So this meant somebody, again, most likely the killer, tore off the March 31st, 1922 page. And this would have been something someone in the family would have done, and usually it was the same family member who did it every single day.
Let me guess who that would have been.
And I think, yeah.
Okay.
I think we know who we think it is.
Yep.
The day after they discover the bodies, court physician Johann Baptist Omuller,
There you go. Perfect.
performed autopsies on the victims inside the barn. We talked about this like with Lizzie Borden.
Yeah.
They just did the autopsies right there. You know, it was like,
Yep.
They're dead. We'll do it here. There's no reason to move them.
Yeah.
He established that the most likely murder weapon was the mattock. Well, duh.
Yeah.
And during an initial search of the property, the mattock isn't found at the scene. And evidence from the autopsy made the doctor believe that the younger Cecilia had been alive for several hours after the assault because her hair was torn out of her head.
Wow.
So either she was in great pain or someone was abusing her.
Yeah.
The skulls of the victims were removed and sent to Munich for further examination, and police set about questioning anybody and everybody who came forward with information. Farmer and butcher Zeman Reislander said that when he was on his way home near Brunnen on April 1st at 3 a.m., he saw 2 mysterious figures at the edge of the forest. When the strangers saw him, they turned around so that their faces couldn't be seen. And later, when he heard of the Hinterkaifeck murders, he thought maybe these 2 strangers were involved. At first, authorities believed the motive for the crime was robbery, and the police interrogated traveling craftsmen, vagrants, lots of folks from the surrounding villages. One person they questioned was an artist, Michaela Plickel, and he passed by Hinterkaifeck on the night after the crime, 3 days before the bodies were discovered.
Gotcha.
And on that night, Plickle saw that the oven inside the house had a fire, and what he smelled wasn't dinner, but something horrible that reminded him of burnt rags. So even if they were dead, someone was inside the house cooking or burning something because there was smoke coming out of the chimney. He also told authorities that someone approached him with a lantern that blinded him, and it spooked him, and he got the heck fire out of there.
Yeah.
And even though he tells them about the smell and the fire, the police never follow up on this.
Really?
And they never try to look into what had been burned that night in the stove or the oven. Then detectives soon abandoned their burglary theory because a large amount of money was found in the house. And what's more, it was clear that the killer stayed on the farm for days because somebody had fed the cattle and eaten an entire supply of bread from the kitchen and had recently cut meat from the pantry.
Jeez.
When they look through the house, they find the murder weapon, the mattock, the pickaxe. It's hidden in a space above the kitchen under false flooring. Now, who's going to know that it's there under false flooring?
Yeah.
Measuring 32 inches long, this mattock had been a design of Andreas, who fashioned it himself to use when he slaughtered cows. The blade was mounted by clamps that were held together by a protruding 8mm threaded screw, which caused brain damage to the animals when struck with the back of the tool. When they search the barn, they find the iron band in the hayloft, along with evidence that someone had been living there. Haystacks were left behind, and whoever had been there had removed the roof tiles, most likely to use as a lookout in case somebody showed up. There was carpet placed down that wasn't normally there. That would have muffled the footsteps of anybody who was up there. I mean, remember, all of these buildings are attached.
Sure.
So the carpet's there to muffle the footsteps in case the police showed up, and they were still there.
Okay.
There were ropes attached to various beams in the barn, and police think that this was done so that the killer could lower himself to the ground faster if anybody entered the house or barn. It was their escape mechanism. And even more evidence was found that somebody had been living in the barn because they defecated in the hayloft and left rinds of smoked meat near the lookout point. Now, police think that all the victims were lured to the barn, perhaps by animals making noises in the stable. But later they determined that human screams coming from the barn couldn't be heard in the living area of the house. So they must have tested this out.
Right.
In 1922, April 6th and 7th, Thursday and Friday, on a makeshift table in the courtyard of the Hinterkaifeck estate, Newburgh District Court physician Dr. Johann Baptiste O. Mueller, he performs the autopsies on the 6 victims. On Thursday, Victoria Gabrielle, Cecilia Gruber, and Cecilia Gabrielle are autopsied. Okay. And on Friday, Andreas Gruber and little Josef and Maria Baumgartner are autopsied.
All right.
On Saturday, April 8th, they transfer the 6 victims in their coffins from Hinterkaifeck. According to J. Ludwig Heckler, 1951, who quotes a contemporary witness, the victims were buried in Weithof-Findman, Great Public Cemetery. The Schopenhauser Vogrenblatt reported on the funeral on April 11th, 1922.
I'm feeling for you, babe.
I'm trying. And I had 3 years of German. I haven't spoken it in 40 years, but okay. And this was in the paper. Quote, after the Judicial Commission had released the bodies of the 6 murdered victims following the dissection, the burial of the 6 victims could take place on Saturday. The number of people who wanted to pay their respects to the victims was incredibly large. Around 3,000 people had come from near and far. It was a shocking sight when the bridge carriage arrived with 6 coffins accompanied by the entire class. Her school children, the entire class of school children came.
It's sad.
After Reverend Haas had performed the blessing at the southern entrance of the cemetery, the unfortunate victims of the crime were laid to rest in a mass grave, the adults on the right and left, and the 2 children in the middle. Reverend Haas described in moving words, using the biblical story of Cain and Abel, how terrible murder is in God's eyes, and how only a person who no longer has a spark of faith in God in their heart can allow themselves to be carried away by such a terrible act, since one cannot even shy away from the murder of innocent children, shrank back. Immediately after the funeral, the first Holy Mass for the dead took place in the church, and it proved too small to accommodate the 3,000 mourners.
You think?
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, the police don't have much to go on, so detectives started putting together a list of suspects. And one of the first suspects that they put on the list was Carl Gabriel, the husband of widowed Victoria. And although he had reportedly been killed by a shell attack in France in December of 1914 during the First World War, his body had never been recovered. And shortly after the Hinterkaifeck murders, people began to speculate about whether or not he had really died. Did he fake his death? You know, do they just think he's dead and he came back and killed them all?
Okay.
At the time, there was never any evidence that Gabriel had survived the First World War. However, after the end of the Second World War, German captives from the Schopenhausen region who were released prematurely from Soviet captivity claimed that they had been sent home by a German-speaking Soviet officer. And everybody seems to think that it was Carl.
Carl.
They went on to report that this man claimed to be the Hinterkaifeck murderer. However, the credibility of this statement was later revised. There was a strong theory that the German-speaking Soviet officer might have been Carl, because those who claimed to have seen Gabriel after his reported death testified that he had wanted to go to Russia. So he's told all his friends he wants to go to Russia. Then he disappears during the First World War, and then this guy who can speak German is working with the Soviet army.
Yeah, it seems a bit of a stretch, but, who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah.
There's so much hearsay and conjecture. Yeah. I mean, everything's a tall tale.
Sure.
But the question of the young Josef Gabriel's paternity would also implicate another suspect in the Hinterkaifeck murders, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the man who found the bodies of the Hinterkaifeck victims, was believed to have had a relationship. Well, we know he had a relationship with Victoria shortly after the death of his first wife in 1918, and he was the father of Josef. But why would he kill his own child?
Right.
Speculation of the involvement of Lorenz happened early in the investigation. The locals thought he was acting suspicious. He was acting suspiciously right after they found the bodies. When Lorenz arrived to help look for the Grubas along with his buddies, the three men had to break a gate to enter the barn because every door was locked. But after they find the four bodies in the barn, Lorenz apparently unlocked the front door with a key and suspiciously entered the house alone. It was there he discovered the bodies of the maid, Maria, and the baby, Josef. And remember, a key to the house went missing just days before the murder.
Oh, yeah, right.
However, it is possible that because Lorenz was a neighbor as well as possibly Victoria's lover, she might have given him a key. And when his buddies asked him why he had chosen to go inside the house alone when they were all uncertain if the killer was still on the property, I mean, they went into the barn first. Lorenz allegedly said he went to go look for his son, Josef.
Okay.
Which makes sense because he's not in the barn.
Sure.
Now, while in the Gruber house, it is known that Lorenz disturbed the bodies of the crime scene in a way that might have compromised the investigation. For many years to come, Lorenz was the center of local suspicion because of his strange comments, which people believed were proof positive that he knew the specifics only the killer could know. Or maybe he's in shock because the woman he loved, even though he had gotten married to another woman, is dead in the barn, and his infant son, who he believes is his, has been slaughtered in his bassinet.
Right.
Less than a year after the Hinterkaifeck murders and the murder investigation, the farm at Hinterkaifeck was completely demolished.
All right. Yeah.
In 1925, a local teacher named Hans Blogger found Lorenz Schlittenbauer visiting the remains of the demolished barn and home. And when he asked him Why are you here? He said that the killer wanted to bury the family's remains in the barn after the murders, but that the ground was too frozen. The ground was too frozen.
Okay.
And Hans is like, whoa, 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 dude.
Yeah.
Are you confessing to me that you know more than you've said? Because that's the kind of admission of guilt that he knew the state of the ground at the time. He knew it was too hard. But he did live nearby. And maybe when they found the bodies stacked on top of each other in the barn, covered in straw and a door, he was making an educated guess about what the killer wanted to do, but couldn't.
That makes sense.
For years, people speculated that Lorenz's reason for murdering the family was because Victoria had demanded money to support Josef. And before he died in 1941, Lorenz Schlittenbauer filed and won several civil claims for slander against those very people who called him the murderer of Hinterkaifeck. And if Lorenz had knowledge of who committed the Hinterkaifeck murders, he took the secret with him to the grave. Now, remember the maid who thought the house was haunted, the one who left?
Right.
Kriesens Rieger. She worked for the family for almost a year, November 1920 to September 1921, and she gave police the names of several suspects to look into. Anton Bickler, a local man who helped out during the potato harvest at Hinterkaifeck, and she knew the ins and outs of the farm. She told police she believed Anton and his brother Karl might have committed the murders. Kriesens claimed that Anton often talked with her about the Gruber family and the Gabriel families, saying, quote, that family ought to be dead, end quote.
Wow.
When she was questioned by the authorities, she also said that the farm dog barked at everyone, but never at Anton. And she said that she spoke with a stranger one night through her window. What? Why are you speaking with a stranger through your window? And she believed it was Karl Bickler, the brother of Anton. And he had no business being at the Gruber home late that night. Kriesens told the police that she believed that Anton and Karl could have committed the murders together with a man named George Siegel, who worked at the farm and knew all about the family fortune. According to her, George Siegel supposedly broke into the home in November of 1920 and had stolen a number of items. It was a crime he denied. When he was questioned, George stated that he had carved the handle of the murder weapon himself when he was working at Hinterkaifeck and knew that the tool would have been kept in the barn passage. So he helped make this. He helped Anton make this thing.
Right.
Then the former maid Kriesens Rieger said the Thaler brothers should also be considered suspects of the murders because it was well known that the brothers had committed several other small burglaries in the area before the Hinterkaifeck murders. And Kriesens said that Josef Thaler stood at her window at night and asked her questions about the family, to which she gave no answer. How many people are standing at her window?
What is this, like a Starbucks drive-thru?
Apparently.
Jeez.
So which one was it? Was it Kriesens? Was it Josef Thaler at the window? Was it Karl Bickler at the window? Come on.
Wait, question for you. Why was she released?
She quit.
Okay.
Because she said it was haunted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I remember.
According to Kriesens, she had a conversation with Josef Thaler where he claimed to know which family member was sleeping in which room and stated that they had a lot of money hidden in the house. During his conversation, she realizes there's another person within earshot of what he was saying, but didn't know who they were. According to her, Josef and the stranger had looked in the barn where the tractors were, the machine house, and then looked up. I don't know what she was implying that they were saying, only that maybe she's thinking, this is where we killed them, and now they're in heaven? I don't know. I mean, she's kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
And how many people are coming to her window to talk to her that she doesn't know who they are?
That's the funniest part.
Several years after the murders in May of 1927, a stranger stopped a resident of Weithofen at midnight asking him questions about the Hinterkaifeck murders before shouting out, quote, "I'm the killer," end quote, and then running away and disappearing into nearby woods. And yet another theory, and the one I think is true, is that Andreas Gruber, the patriarch of the family, killed them all in cold blood. Why? Well, remember, the killer remained at the farm for the next 3 days, and Andreas didn't have anywhere else to go. So he continued to tend to the farm and the animals. He cooked meals, even tore off the date on the calendar to April 1st, the day after the murders.
Right.
The fact that somebody was present on the farm was observed by several eyewitnesses, including the coffee-selling brothers, Hans and Eduard Shirovsky, and Mikhail Plickel, who was approached by someone in the dark, with the lantern.
Right.
Most likely, Andreas Gruber.
Right.
Get out of here.
Right.
After April 1st, there were no other reports of someone living at the farmhouse, as no one else visited the property until April 4th. So it was simply assumed that the killer had remained in the house for 3 days after the murders.
Wow.
Or did Andreas meet his maker in the barn alongside his family, killed by someone else the day after he murdered the family? Or, because he wasn't bludgeoned in the head and was impaled, is that something he could have done to himself?
Right.
Did Lorenz kill Andreas after seeing what he did to the family? Because there are many who believe that Josef was his child and not the product of rape and incest between Andreas and Victoria. Victoria once told Lorenz, quote, "That's the better thing that I'm pregnant by father. Otherwise, he would beat me to death," end quote. It is suspected that Victoria was only allowed to meet with other men like Lorenz because she was already pregnant. And the fact that she was beaten to death could mean that Andreas learned the identity of Josef's real father. And that's the reason she fought with her mom and dad running away just 1 day before the murders.
Right.
Remember, little Cecilia tells her friend that at school.
Yeah.
And maybe, just maybe, when Andreas discovers that he is not the father, Maury Povich, you are not the father.
You beat me to it.
He went into a rage and beat his family members to death, strangling Victoria, the only one who was strangled before beating. Remember, she was strangled first and then beat to death.
Right.
So, and then he beat his wife and then the 7-year-old Cecilia when they attempted to intervene. And maybe he sexually assaulted his little granddaughter before killing her. I mean, he is a known rapist, and she's found half naked.
Sure.
Maybe he'd wanted to rape his granddaughter and his daughter, and his wife prevented him from doing it. And after he slit her throat, he either threw or lost his pocket knife in the straw.
Right.
And then hid the mattock in the attic space where it's later found. Then, after he tried to bury the bodies and discovered that the ground was too frozen, Andreas spent April 1st on his farm, tending to his duties, but remained inside the barn and out of sight whenever people showed up, such as the mechanic, Albert Hoffman, who reported seeing no one at the farm on the morning after the murders. And because apparently Lorenz Schlittenbauer knew from his admission later that that little Josef was his son, he went to the farm to speak with Victoria, as he'd done many times in the past, and found no one in the house. Then maybe he went to the barn and found the bodies of Andreas, Cecilia, and Victoria, and in doing so, surprised Andreas, who was found wearing his night clothes when his body is found. So did he surprise Andreas? I mean, did Andreas kill everybody and then Lorenz surprised him and killed him himself?
Right.
Then, knowing that his own son was also probably dead, Lorenz went into the house and found the slain bodies of the maid and his son. So did he throw himself on the pick, or did Lorenz get him with the pickaxe,
Yeah.
Then Lorenz goes home. He waits a few days while deciding what to do next, knowing full well that Andreas is already dead by his hand. He sent his 2 young sons to investigate the farm, knowing they weren't in any danger. I mean, think about this. He sent his 2 young sons, his son and his stepson, to the farm to see if anybody was there. So if he thought that they could have been in danger, would he have sent them alone?
Right.
And if he knew that people were dead, why not go ahead and send them?
Yeah.
And if the boys find the dead bodies, it wasn't him that found the dead bodies.
Right. It's a good alibi.
And when they return with no news, he goes out himself, taking his own 2 friends. He didn't go alone to serve as witnesses.
Right.
And then he entered the house with the key that he took from Andreas and again found the body of his young son. And if this theory is true, Lorenz kept his secret for years after the murders, telling no one of his involvement, but hinting at knowing more than anyone else about the murders. He knew the killer tried to bury the bodies, but couldn't because the ground was too frozen. Right?
Right.
There is another theory, if you can believe this. that the killer was a German migrant by the name of Paul Mueller, who was the only suspect in the 1898 murder of a Massachusetts family. And during his research into several unsolved axe murders, author Bill James went through American newspaper archives and came to the conclusion that the killer had used the train tracks as a method of traveling from one state to another in order to carry out the killings. He's an early serial killer. Paul Mueller's suspected crimes in the United States share some similarities to the Hinterkaifeck murders, such as the slaughter of an entire family in an isolated home, the use of the blunt force trauma or an axe tool as the weapon of choice, and the moving and stacking of the bodies of the victims. And he would never rob anybody. And remember, they weren't robbed.
Right.
The still unsolved Vasila axe murders were also attributed to Paul Mueller, in which a family were bludgeoned to death in their own home. And James suspects that Mueller, who was described as a German immigrant, might have returned to the motherland of Deutschland by 1912 when his crimes and their pattern were noticed by the police and the journalists. So he kills all these people by rail, going from town to town in America, and when they're getting on to him, takes the boat back home to the motherland.
Okay.
So we have lots of theories, nothing concrete. And over 100 years later, the Hinterkaifeck murders are still unsolved.
Wow.
The investigation was closed in 1955 with no charges brought against any of those suspected in the gruesome crime.
Wow.
The last questioning of a person of interest occurred in 1956, just before the retirement of Detective Chief Superintendent Conrad Mueller. Today, it's unsolved. It's crazy. There's so many different theories. What do you think? Did Andreas kill his whole family? Was it somebody else?
Yeah.
Was it Lorenz?
Yeah.
See, I think my money is either on Andreas. I think Andreas killed everybody.
Yeah, I do too.
Whether he killed himself or not is the one that's up for debate, and whether Lorenz did that after he saw what Andreas did. It's interesting to me.
Yeah, I think Lorenz killed Andreas.
Do you?
Yeah, because, I mean, to kill yourself by impaling yourself on, I mean, there's easier ways to do that, because he didn't have any guarantee that was going to kill him if he tried to impale himself like that.
True. That's true.
Yeah.
And maybe he didn't have a plan to kill himself at all because he's in the kitchen cooking.
Yeah.
He's taking the dates off. It's just like it's another day.
It seems like a rage killing. And afterwards, he's like, oh, crap, what did I do?
Yeah.
And he's just kind of in a daze and trying to figure it out and cooking. Yeah.
I've taught you well, young grasshopper.
Grasshopper.
But that is the story of the Hinterkaifeck murders. And that's all I have to say about that. For nearly 7 years, Jane Doe has lived in the shadows, her past buried deep beneath layers of secrecy and silence. After completing more than was asked of her in her last assignment for the enigmatic Kaiwolf project, Jane Doe vanished without a trace, leaving behind a trail of dead bodies and unanswered questions. But now, as the specter of her past returns with a vengeance, Jane finds herself thrust back into a world she thought she'd left behind forever. When her former sins come knocking on her door, Jane is faced with an impossible choice: continue to hide in the shadows, or once again take up arms against the forces that threaten to tear apart the fabric of society. With enemies lurking around every corner and allies who may not be what they seem, Jane must rely on her wits, training, and her unyielding determination to survive. And while trust is a luxury she cannot afford, Jane must confront the truth about herself and her past. As the clock ticks, she realizes that the line between family, friend, and foe are razor thin, and in the end, the only person she can rely on is herself. Jane Doe 4 Charlotte is available September 24th, 2024. No name, no regrets, no mercy.
Well, here's my take on it.
Okay.
Out of everything that you told me, This is what I take away from it.
Okay.
That first maid made the best decision in her entire life.
She's like, I'm out of here.
She dodged a bullet.
Well, I mean, do you think maybe he was up in the attic, or was somebody frogging? You know, there's this thing called frogging where people live in your walls or live in your attic, and then they come out when you're not home and eat your food. And
the one thing that makes me think that, I mean, I think Andreas did kill them out of rage or whatever, but the thing that throws me off is the fact that there was a whole section in the hayloft where this person was living.
Yeah.
And had a lookout and the whole 9 yards. So that adds a whole different...
True. Unless he was up there looking out and he'd had coffee and he had to go. And he couldn't make it back to the house
true.
Or the outhouse.
Yeah, that's
Not
true.
a coffee drinker, but I've heard stories.
Yeah.
I've heard the tales.
Jeez. Once again, the perfect crime.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Wow. Oh, well. Okay, well, let's go from the perfect crime to the stupid crimes with a little bless your heart.
Well, bless your heart.
All right, number one.
Safe.
Safe.
Eins. I'm still in my German mode. Eins.
Okay, number one. Safe. A Reds Guardian game, my Reds, Cincinnati Reds.
Yes.
Took an acrobatic turn when a fan sprinted onto the field, attempted a fist bump with Cleveland's Tyler Freeman, and capped it off with a backflip in the left field.
What?
His gymnastic escape was cut short by a Cincinnati police officer who deployed a taser, leaving the fan grounded and quickly surrounded by officers.
He's like, I'm not chasing after that. I'm just going to roll the lightning. Just
sort of
roll the lightning.
Reminds me of that scene in Indiana Jones when the guy's got the big sword and and he just pulls out a gun.
Pulls out a gun and shoots him.
Okay.
Yep.
The fan, now banned from the stadium, faces charges of criminal trespassing and obstructing official business. Baseball legend Johnny Bench applauded the officer's quick catch in a viral post. Thanks to the swift response, the game went on without a hitch.
I thought you were going to say that Johnny Bench was like, that guy did a good backflip.
My story about Johnny Bench, this was when I was living in Cincinnati. I went to a restaurant one night and they had this big wall and they had all the Cincinnati Reds handprints in cement on this wall. And Johnny Bench's hand was on there. His hands were bigger than my head, and I have a big head.
Makes for a good catcher, honey. Makes for a good catcher.
Yeah. All right, number two.
Zwei.
There you go. I'm calling this one Good Boy. Good Boy.
That's a good boy.
A pet store break-in turned into a bizarre scene when an Ohio man allegedly smashed kennels and set loose dogs, birds, ferrets, rabbits, and gerbils.
It's Pee Wee Herman all over again.
It is. Columbus police arrived at the Hilliard Shopping Center early on July 9th to find animals roaming free inside and outside the store. Authorities managed to round up the escapees, but the strangest twist came. Here it comes.
Yeah.
An hour later, when the suspect was apprehended, he was apprehended with several gerbils reportedly stashed in his pants.
No, that's not true.
It's absolutely true.
No. Is that a gerbil in your pants, or are you just happy to see me?
Oh, man. All right. Number three, and finally.
Eins, zwei, drei. There we go.
They were where? An Arizona man suspected of DUI was caught in a precarious situation, literally, when deputies found him with his finger stuck in a can of White Claw after crashing into a guardrail.
Wait, his finger was stuck in the top of a White Claw. Like the little hole that you drink it out of?
Yeah, the drink White Claw, yeah.
I love a good White Claw.
There you go.
They're gluten-free.
When approached, the driver fumbled with the seltzer can and assured the officer that he was totally perfect, despite evidence to the contrary.
I haven't been drinking.
Yeah, after he smashed into a guardrail. The man was arrested on multiple DUI charges and for causing damage to county property. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office reminded residents to report possible DUIs because hard seltzer excuses don't hold up in court.
Yeah.
Oh,
Poor
can you imagine
guy.
being pulled over
Bless his-
and you got your finger stuck in the top of your can?
Yeah, and then you come out pointing and the can's on the end. I have not been drinking.
I am fine to drive. Oh, Lord.
Well, if you have a bless your heart or you know somebody hurts who needs blessing,
Yes.
all you got to do is go to hitchtahomicide.com. When you get there, there's a pull-down menu where you can also suggest a case or tell us about your brush with true crime.
Yes.
That's my amazing husband out there.
And that's my amazing, beautiful bride in the booth.
Join us next time on Hitched to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.